every year about this time, I always, when I see one of these, it piques my interest, and I want to go read it. It's when these preseason magazines, if it's Athlon or Lindy's or whoever, when they grant coaches anonymity to talk about rival programs. And we know this is interesting because typically whenever you have coaches with a microphone in front of them, it is bland, it is blasé, it is coaches speak, it is don't say a lot without saying anything. And then you say, all right, we'll give you anonymity to say whatever you want, and then you actually get the truth. Now, there's not a name associated with it, so that's the tough part, but at least you have the mentality of knowing an SEC head coach said this about other SEC programs that they recruit against, that they scout against, they play against, all that sort of stuff. So there's three things that opposing coaches talked about. LSU's talent, Myles Brennan, and the offense without Burrow and Brady. Let's go through each of them. And I'm curious if your reaction is going to be the same that mine was. First, again, this is an anonymous interview with Lindy Sports. So SEC head coach granted anonymity by Lindy Sports. Talking about LSU's talent. Quote, they knew they were losing some good players, but they got a good roster. Comparing it to their magical year, you can't compare it to a magical year. No, they're not going to be what they were last year, but they've got good enough players and coaches to be LSU. End quote. Isn't that what we've talked about all offseason? When your championship season is literally the greatest season ever, you cannot replicate that. It's never going to be that. It's never going to be 5,000 yards, 60 touchdowns, largest margin of victory in the Heisman ever, most yards and points by a college offense ever, 14 players drafted, 5 first-round draft picks, on and on and on and on and on. Double-digit wins over the top 5 teams in the country in the preseason. Like, we know, you know the lineage, right? It's never going to be that again. But it doesn't have to be the greatest ever to be a championship season. And that's what he's saying. Look, this coach is saying they're not going to be what they were last year, but they got good enough players and coaches to be LSU. So the key is, what do you define as LSU? Is LSU a championship contender? Is LSU 9-3 Citrus Bowl? What is LSU? That's the question that this team this year is going to answer. It's not going to be 2019. It's never going to be 2019 again, and that's okay. You can still win SEC and national championships without being the greatest team ever. But what is your standard? That's what we'll find out this year. And what I've said this offseason, what I'm going to stick to, and you're going to hear me say 10,000 times more, is my hope for this season is that LSU's basement is New Year's 6. If your basement is 10-2 and in the New Year's 6 every year, you are perpetually in contention for the national title. You are where Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Oklahoma are. Not easy to do in the SEC West. I grant you that. But that's just the reality you're going to face. You're not going to switch leagues. You're not all of a sudden going to go to the Pac-12 South and be duking it out with UCLA and Arizona State. It's not going to happen. You got to face Alabama and Auburn and Texas A&M and Florida every single year. So can you do that? And as this coach said, they've got good enough players and coaches to be LSU. What is to be LSU? What does that mean? In my opinion, my hope is that means you're every year, late November, right there playing a game to go to the playoff. And at absolute worst, New Year's 6. That's one. 2, they talked about Myles Brennan. This is an anonymous coach talking about Brennan. Quote, Myles Brennan has got the talent. He just hasn't played very much. And it takes time in this league. They are very solid at receiver, but there is only one guy that you have to know where he is on the field, Jamar Chase. He's special. Okay, I'm good with that. Not every team in America has one guy where you have to know where he is on the field because he's special, and you've got the best receiver in college football. Awesome. And I can live with a head coach saying, Myles Brennan has got the talent. He just hasn't played very much, and it takes time in this league. I'm okay with that. How quickly can Myles Brennan ascend? That right? That's a very fair comment to say. And one of the things, of course, I wish Myles Brennan had spring. Of course, I wish they had a longer offseason for him. But one of the things that I'm confident in or I'm comfortable in is that LSU's schedule, as brutal as it is in November, here's like, if you want the positive spin on it, as brutal as LSU's November is that we've talked about, where you got Bama, South Carolina, at Auburn, at A&M, heinous way to finish the schedule. What that gives you is all of September and all of October to get Myles Brennan ready for that gauntlet. And yes, that means you're going to have to win in Gainesville. And I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying I think it's something LSU will do this year. Certainly they can win there. But that one, you've got basically 9 weeks to get Myles Brennan ready for November. Is that enough time? We'll find out. And the one other thing, again, this was coaches anonymously, SEC head coaches anonymously talking to Lindy Sports about other teams in the SEC. So they talked about LSU's talent. They talked about Myles Brennan. They talked about Steve Ensminger. Here you go. Quote, "The return of Steve Ensminger as offensive coordinator was important. His fingerprints on that offense were grossly overshadowed." As far as defense, they said, Aranda and Pelini are great defensive minds, but different personalities. One coach is like the Pope, another coach is like he's in a rock band. I think that's fair, and I'm cool with that either way. But the line that is the most important there is talking about Steve Ensminger, quote, "His fingerprints on that offense were grossly overshadowed." It's one thing if you've got a Baton Rouge LSU media member saying it. It's another if you've got an assistant coach saying it. It's another if you've got a player on the roster saying it's someone who has a vested interest or who has a bias toward that. It's another when you have an opposing coach in the same league saying that guy's fingerprints were all over that offense and it has been grossly overshadowed. I am not going to ever minimize the importance that Joe Brady brought in that moment in time to LSU football. He brought some new ideas. He brought some innovation. He was a great yin and yang for Steve Ensminger. He worked certainly well with the receivers. People forget that. Brady wasn't working with the quarterbacks. He worked with the receivers along with Mickey Joseph. I think there was a lot of good that Joe Brady did. But if you don't think Steve Ensminger, as the OC, calling every play, had the biggest impact on what they did fundamentally, obviously Burrow had to go execute it, then you're minimizing it, almost embarrassingly minimizing Steve Ensminger's role. And I'm excited to see him get to play this year with Ensminger so you can see just how they're going to continue to open that offense up. So some interesting comments there. Opposing coaches talking about LSU in 2020, part of Lindy's Sports preseason preview. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.